Fallout can be at times eerie. With its grim dystopian themes cast against its dark humor, this is why you and I enjoy this game. There's a sense of unease and unsurety across every location you visit in the decrepit wasteland. Amidst the dread, however, there's beauty in the madness, which is why it's fun to stumble across an Easter egg that eventually became an entire Iceberg video that I haven't seen anyone talk about before. No, literally, I'm scrolling on Google for even the most small details on this topic, and there's not a single forum or publishing talking about this. Even on YouTube, there's a few videos of the obvious in-your-face Stephen King references, which we will get to those Easter eggs too within this Iceberg, but there's nothing directly discussing this reference in particular. Hence, I bring you the magnum opus of Easter eggs, Stephen King's The Shine in Fallout. Now, hunting this Easter egg, again which is now an entire Iceberg video, wasn't so much of a hunt as it was fate. See, Mason released a badass video called The Weirdest Fallout Lore, and upon listening to it twice, his voice echoed in my mind for several minutes.
In the shadowed corridors of the cathedral, there reside beings of extraordinary power known as the Psychers.
And then it hit me. The Psychers site in the Fallout universe is a nod to The Shine from the Stephen King multiverse. And yes, for those of you who don't know, Stephen King quite literally has his own multiverse, which The Shine plays a pivotal role in depending on the book. Stephen King, over the last 50 years, has published some of the finest horror and sci-fi novels in the last century, with books ranging from characters with telekinetic pyro powers, such as what we saw in the infamous Carrie novel, to completely unhinged fathers that attempt to red rum or murder their families, ergo The Shining.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
He also has one of the finest fiction sagas I've ever read, called the Dark Tower series, although the movie was absolute cheeks.
I do not kill with my gun. I kill with my heart.
What do all three of these books have in common? They're tied to the Dark Tower itself, which is the central pillar of existence in Stephen King's multiverse, and it represents the nexus of all worlds and realities. The Shine, also known as The Shining, represents a psychic ability that plays a significant role in connecting characters and events across these different realities. The Shine is most famously introduced in The Shining with Danny Torrance, but it appears in various forms throughout King's works, making it a key force in the Dark Tower universe. Much like the Psycher's power in the Fallout universe, The Shine refers to psychic abilities that include telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, and other supernatural senses. Characters with The Shine can access knowledge beyond their immediate reality, communicate across great distances, and, in some cases, influence the world around them in supernatural ways. This ability connects them to the broader forces of King's multiverse, including the Dark Tower and its workings. Now that we have more background on Stephen King's multiverse, it should be more apparent why this video deserves a dedicated Iceberg to it. It's because this shit is cool, and because there's a bit of overlapping depth between King's multiverse and the plethora of hidden references in the Fallout series. Again, when making this Iceberg, there are very obvious Stephen King references in Fallout, so what I'm thinking we should do is get those out of the way, which will be the tip of the iceberg, followed up by mid-level Stephen King referenced Fallout lore. And then we'll finish it off with the deep level references, which will include our newfound SK Easter egg and a few other interesting and unique crossovers. The Shining. In Fallout 76, the Stephen King references pay direct respect to Stephen King's 1980 The Shining. The Shining was one of the all-time greatest horror movies for many of our parents and perhaps grandparents' generation. The Shining is a horror novel by Stephen King about a guy named Jack Torrance who takes a job as a winter caretaker of an isolated hotel called the Overlook. Jack brings his wife Wendy and his young son Danny to live there for the winter. Danny has a psychic ability called The Shining, which lets him see things others can't, like the hotel's dark and creepy history, specifically room 237. As the snow traps him in the hotel, Jack starts losing his mind because the hotel's evil spirits begin to mess with him. Meanwhile, Danny's psychic visions get more intense and he realizes the hotel wants to take control of his dad. Jack spirals into madness, putting his family in danger, and it turns into a snow-ridden fight for survival. Creepy shit like Danny riding his tricycle around the hotel and not being fazed by twin dead girls, or Danny pointing at a door repeatedly saying, "Red rum," which spells backwards murder, if you haven't seen the movie, are some of the creepiest parts of the film. The more I think about it, the more Danny actually scared me as a child, more than his dad did. I wasn't sure why Danny was so weird, but it's because he has the shine. Nods to these iconic scenes can be found on the porch of an unapologetically named Torrance house in Fallout 76. To get there, you can head south of Vault 76's entrance and go across this cute what looks to be pond on the map, and it should be right here. To whoever put this in the game, maybe it was you, Todd Howard, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Danny Torrance's trike is stood upright next to a few blocks that when viewed reads Red Rum. Across the way, there is also a labyrinth, much like the labyrinth we see in the final act of The Shining at the Overlook Hotel. And if you feel spooky enough, you can enter this labyrinth in hopes that you'll come across Jack's hollowed out corpse with an iconic pickaxe. But I will say and warn you that there are protectrons throughout this labyrinth, so stay frosty. The Overlook Hotel from The Shining is basically a focal point of malevolent energy. And while it's never explicitly said to be tied directly to the Dark Tower's big bads, you can infer that the hotel is connected to the same dark forces that want to tear apart the multiverse. Like it and other powerful entities, the Overlook seems to feed upon fear, suffering, and psychic energy, which aligns it with the forces of the Crimson King and other dark powers that pop up in the Dark Tower. The Shining stands alone as a story. Its themes of psychic power, malevolent entities, and cosmic fate link it back to the same universe as the Dark Tower. The book, however, is ultimately all about fear, isolation, and how people can be influenced by dark forces, both inside and out. In a way, I'd go so much to say that the overall themes play various roles in Fallout 2. It.
I know your secret, your dirty little secret.
There's also another cool obvious Easter egg, assuming you can find it. If you head over to the White Spring Golf Club in Fallout 76, when you enter this hallway, you'll walk a few feet before hanging a left at the kitchenette type of area. Give the fridge a good tug and peek inside and you'll see a clown with a balloon. The clown's resemblance to Pennywise isn't necessarily uncanny, but I want you to think about this. How many iconic clowns do you know of that hold a single red balloon? It's for sure a hug paid to Stephen King's Pennywise from
No
It.
one wants to play with the clown anymore. Play a game with me, would you?
Which, as I'm sure most already know, is about this group of kids in a town called Derry who come together to fight this ancient, terrifying creature that can take the form of whatever you're most afraid of. Most of the time, it shows up as Pennywise the Clown. In the book and the film, the story switches between two timelines, when the group, called the Losers Club, is young, around 12 and 13, and then 27 years later when they're adults, because this creature comes back every few decades to terrorize the town. When they're kids, they manage to defeat it, or so they think. But as adults, they realize they didn't fully get rid of it, so they have to come back and face their worst fears all over again. In the Dark Tower multiverse, there's this cosmic battle between good and evil forces. On the evil side, you've got beings like It, which is actually a lesser creature compared to some of the big bads from the Dark Tower. It is kind of a servant or manifestation of the Crimson King, one of the top tier villains in the Dark Tower series, who's basically trying to destroy all of existence and break down the barriers between worlds. On the other hand, the cosmic turtle Matron, who is mentioned in It, is part of this multiverse as well, and represents the opposite force, creation and balance. The turtle, like the Dark Tower itself, stands as a protector of the multiverse. So when the Losers Club faces It, they're unknowingly part of this bigger struggle between the forces that hold the multiverse together and those that want to tear it apart. Or, in short, It is not just a spooky clown, but part of a much larger interdimensional evil that ties back to the epic struggle in the Dark Tower series. It's all connected in King's multiverse. Salem's Lot. Depending on who you ask, Fallout 4's Salem was a bit of a letdown in terms of horror Easter eggs overall. Where the Dunwich brothers shined, Salem didn't completely lean into the horror one would have hoped for with quests like a generic bug extermination objective. Still, the town of Salem in Fallout 4 feels inspired by Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which centers around a town slowly becoming plagued by vampires. The eerie atmosphere of the ruined town also echoes the general tone of King's works. I won't say much more about Salem's Lot since we'll talk about one of the main characters here shortly, but I will say that my only wish is that this town in Fallout 4 would have been more blunt about this reference and included a fun quest where perhaps the protagonist had to find who or what was picking off the town's local residents. Christine. Christine in Fallout 4. I personally have been a victim of this tragedy, and so have many others. There's an entire forum dedicated to the victims of Christine, RIP. But who is Christine? Or what is Christine? Christine is the name of a car in a horror novel that revolves around a possessed car and how it transforms its owner. The story centers on a high school kid named Arnie Cunningham, a bit of an outcast, who buys an old beat-up 1958 Plymouth Fury named Christine. The car has a creepy history, and as Arnie fixes her up, he starts changing too. He kind of becomes a douchebag. He becomes more confident, but also meaner, as if Christine is taking control of him. The car has a mind of its own. It repairs itself, holds grudges, and even kills people. And if you're playing Fallout 4, it'll even glow an ominous red. The real horror, however, kicks in when Christine starts attacking anyone who messes with Arnie. His best friend Dennis and his girlfriend Lee try to save him, but then they realize Christine is way more dangerous than they thought. And you'll realize this too if you're ever her prey when wandering the cracked and tattered street of the Commonwealth. Tenpenny Tower, The Shining. This will actually be the second Shining reference in this Fallout vid, and it's very similar to our Fallout 76 Easter eggs for a few reasons. But let's get acquainted with Tenpenny Tower. Tenpenny Tower in Fallout 3 is a super fancy high-rise hotel in the middle of the wasteland, where all these rich people hang out and act like they're better than everyone else. It's run by this guy, Alistair Tenpenny, who is not exactly likable. He's kind of like the mid-level manager who thinks the world revolves around him and that everyone else is beneath him. While everyone else in the wasteland is struggling to survive, the people in Tenpenny Tower are chilling in luxury, totally ignoring the chaos outside. There's also this whole drama about whether they should let ghouls move in, and of course, the elite are up in arms about that. But we're no ghoul, so if you waltz in the mid-floor apartments in Tenpenny, there's Danny's trike in the hallway along with bloodstains on the walls and an overturned chair. This is a direct reference to Stanley Kubrick's iconic horror film, The Shining, which is again based on the novel by Stephen King. Danny Torrance sees a murder scene with two twins that I mentioned earlier lying mutilated, with blood scattered across the walls and an overturned chair on the floor. Pet Sematary. Fallout 4's Far Harbor expansion, in my humble opinion, pays the briefest nod to Stephen King's well-known Pet Sematary. When roaming around the cemetery in Far Harbor, just east of the Zephyr Ridge camp, you will find a kitten leaned against a nice-sized headstone. At first glance of this kitten picture, you might think this is a reach and that the kitten is a one-off pet burial in this locale. But if you continue to survey the lay of the land, you'll find a leash and a baseball as well. Interestingly enough, there's a hole the size of a small animal that would have burrowed its way out of the ground. It doesn't appear to be very ghoul or human-sized. Pet Sematary is one of Stephen King's darker and more messed up stories. It's about this family, the Creeds, who moved to a small town in Maine. They've got a house near a creepy old pet cemetery, or cemetery spelled with an S, as it's misspelled by the kids who made it, where locals have been burying their pets for years. Beyond that cemetery, there's a more ancient and sinister burial ground. When something dies and gets buried in that ancient ground, it doesn't stay dead. It comes back to life in a twisted, creepy version of what it used to be. When the family cat dies in the film, the dad gets tempted and buries it there, and then the cat comes back, but it's off. Then tragedy strikes the family when their young son Gage dies in an accident. The dad, completely heartbroken and against all warnings, decides to bury Gage in that same cursed ground, hoping to bring him back. But things go south since what comes back isn't Gage. It's something much darker and more dangerous. Kind of like these weird dog-sized mole rats that sprung from the animal coffins underneath the wet soil. In the Dark Tower series, there are these unique places called thinnies, where the fabric between worlds is thin and things from other realities can seep through. The burial ground in Pet Sematary is what I would call a thinny. It's an ancient cursed place with supernatural powers that seem to reach beyond the normal world, almost like a portal to another reality. The idea that burying something there brings it back changed hints that the burial ground might be connected to one of these thinnies, or that it's a place where the barrier between life and death, and maybe even different worlds, is weakened. The burial ground in Pet Sematary is said to be haunted by a creature known as a Wendigo, a monstrous force that influences the resurrection process. This Pet Sematary could tie back to the larger multiverse in the Dark Tower, where evil entities like the creature from It and other monsters cross between worlds. Luckily, these evil entities are fairly easy to take out in Fallout's expansion. I mean, how hard can it be to kill a resurrected mole rat? Kurt Barlow. Players will come across a terminal that reads an entry from a user that goes by the name K. Barlow. Fans of Stephen King will instantly recognize this as Kurt Barlow. Kurt Barlow is a fictional vampire and the main antagonist of King's 1975 horror novel, Salem's Lot. The character is a powerful vampire who moved to the main town of Jerusalem's lot with the intent to form a vampire colony of its residents. Due to his own predations, as well as those of the residents he turns, the entire town is ultimately overrun by vampirism. Only a few of the residents actually escape. Although his true age is unknown, he claims to be so old that he predates the founding of Christianity by centuries.
Run!
These ancient, maleficent forces are seen time after time across King's novels because they each move through the tower to inhabit other worlds. And this BARLOW character ultimately ties back to King's Greater Dark Tower series, which is clearly, in my opinion, referenced here. The Stand. If I ever had to recommend a book on pandemics, it would be this one. The Stand is Stephen King's massive, post-apocalyptic novel where most of the world gets wiped out by a deadly virus called Captain Trips, which is kind of confusing because when I read it in my youth, I thought it was a human at first. It's a super flu that kills 99% of the human population in no time. Readers are left with this huge empty world with just a few survivors left, and they start having dreams that lead them to two places, either to an old woman named Mother Abigail, who represents good, or to this creepy guy called Randall Flagg, who's the embodiment of evil. Again, how do they do this? They do this through the Shine, aka the Psyker's Sight in Fallout. It's also important to note that Randall Flagg in this instance is kind of reminiscent of Caesar's Legion. And as a side note, Flagg is a primary villain, leading the forces of evil in a post-apocalyptic world, but he's much more than just a bad guy in that one book. He's a powerful recurring antagonist in King's multiverse. In the Dark Tower, Flagg is also known as the Man in Black, or Walter O'Dim, and he serves the Crimson King, the ultimate evil force trying to destroy the Dark Tower, and by extension all of reality. Flagg is a multiverse traveling sorcerer, causing chaos and trying to seize power wherever he goes, whether it's in the Stand's world or Roland's in the Dark Tower. Back to where I was. The survivors split into two groups. Mother Abigail's people are trying to rebuild society in a peaceful, decent way, while Flagg's crew is all about chaos, power, and destruction. Again, reminiscent of Caesar's Legion as seen in Fallout New Vegas. The whole thing turns into a battle between these two forces, good versus evil, and it all takes place in the dusty Southwest. People have made parallels when looking at the environmental backdrop of both Fallout and The Stand, since they both occur in the Southwest and have ties to Las Vegas. Both New Vegas and The Stand show societal fragmentation of humans when something catastrophic occurs. Regarding a more minute detail, there's also a bit of crucifixion that occurs from Randall Flagg's thuggish group within King's book. And this brutal scene is also shown in the town square of Nipton when you find the town in ruins after being taken over by Caesar's Legion. Do I personally believe that Fallout New Vegas is one big intentional metaphor for Stephen King's The Stand? I believe that post-catastrophic worlds have similar narratives, and that when the locations are the same between these two worlds, both universes can feel familiar. But it is fun to think about whether or not a developer out there was inspired by The Stand when drafting up Fallout New Vegas. Far Harbor. Speculation has occurred that Fallout's expansion Far Harbor, given its geography to Maine, which is where most of King's work takes place, is a nod in itself to Mr. King. If you recall, Far Harbor takes us to a mist-shrouded island off the coast of Maine. King is a renowned author who sets many of his horror and suspense stories in Maine, making the state almost a character in his narratives. I would go as far as to say that Maine is to Stephen King as North Carolina is to Nicholas Sparks. It's cool to note the similarities of King's version of Maine versus Fallout's take on the state, as both are isolated, rugged coastal towns that are physically and psychologically isolating. Did I mention that King's pet cemetery occurs in Ludlow, Maine? How many versions of a pet cemetery are you aware of? I'm only aware of two, both of which can be found in Fallout and King lore, and in Maine. I think there was even a publication on this connection back when the DLC was first announced. And someone also questioned this on a Reddit forum, but nobody ever answered them back, poor bastard. As mentioned before, there has been chatter and speculation that New Vegas was an ode to King's The Stand, due to the geographical, well, coincidence. As Mason said in our 27 cut content video, we don't believe in coincidences, and one can't help but feel that this itself is too much of a coincidence. The Mist. It's worth noting that within Far Harbor, we have this constant mist or fog rolling in, almost like the mist from Stephen King, which is based on a book where terrifying monsters plague the town as a dense fog sets in. When coming to Far Harbor, you're also greeted with the town in desperate need of help fending off monsters. And when looking at the bay next to the harbor, we also see carcasses of large monstrosities. Another parallel is the fact that one of the most prominent characters in King's The Mist believes that the mist and the monsters it brings are divine punishments.
Read the good book. It calls for blood.
If this sounds familiar, it's because the residents of Far Harbor believe that the children of Adam were somehow responsible for spreading the fog, while the children believe that its growth was Adam's reward for their faith. They believe that the fog is a manifestation of their god Adam and see it as both a blessing and a punishment. The children of Adam treat the fog as sacred, worshipping its effects and advocating for its spread, much like the religious fanaticism seen in Stephen King's The Mist.
There's nothing out there. Nothing in the mist. What if you're wrong? Then I guess that joke would be on me.
The Shine. Finally, we've made it. The Easter egg that started the Stephen King and Fallout crossover, Iceberg. As mentioned earlier, the Shine is telekinetic powers. If you have read or plan to read Stephen King lore, aka his books, then you'll find a common recurrence, which is the supernatural. His protagonists at times reveal their connection to the Shine, which can give them an upper edge when all seems lost, especially when going against the likes of deranged fathers or otherworldly beings. In each of his books, he will riddle his publishings with fun nods to other books, which is connected via the Dark Tower. What's interesting, however, is that Fallout seems to have taken a page from this cool superpower by including their very own superpower, which is ironically called the Sight. The Sight, the Shine, they sound somewhat similar. As a quick recap, Psychers in Fallout are individuals who possess psychic powers due to exposure to radiation, the forced evolutionary virus, or other mutations. The Sight is a form of clairvoyance exhibited by characters like Mama Murphy in Fallout 4. It allows her to see visions of the past, present, and future, providing cryptic guidance to the player. These abilities often come at a cost, such as mental instability or dependence on other substances. In Mama Murphy's case, various in-game drugs called chems enhance her visions. Unsurprisingly, the Shine in Stephen King lore can reveal past tragedies or foretell future events, and it's often a source of internal conflict and external danger for those who possess it. Interestingly as well, both Psychers with the Sight and characters with the Shine often feel isolated due to their abilities. They may be misunderstood or feared by others, leading to societal alienation. As well, in Fallout, Psychers can be exploited for their powers or hunted by factions seeking to use or eliminate them, much like King's Doctor Sleep, where groups like the True Knot hunt individuals with the Shine to consume their essence and prolong their own lives, kind of like vampirism. Furthermore, both universes delve into the complexities of the human psyche and the moral implications of possessing supernatural abilities. Or to put it simply, they examine how power can be both a gift and a burden. And again, as my buddy Mason said, even in Fallout, they have special equipment to help hinder these abilities for the Psychers. At first glance, I thought this King reference could be considered just a hunch, but when you look at the lengths that the Fallout devs took and went through to include other nods of Stephen King lore into their video games, then the dots begin to connect, and we can assume that the Psychers' Sight runs in parallel with the Shine. My thesis. The wildest theory, which is my theory, is that Fallout has indirectly and inherently become part of the Dark Tower lore from Stephen King's multiverse. The Dark Tower is the center of all worlds, implying that the past, the present, and the future, and alternative realities are all interwoven and connected. With Fallout's multi-layered Easter eggs, it too has become part of this greater multiverse, existing as a vessel to introduce King lore into its own reality. What I'm implying is that Fallout's consistent references to Stephen King has consequentially cemented itself as part of King's overarching Dark Tower universe. In fact, you are now included in part of this thematic universe simply by watching this very Iceberg video. Taking it a step further, maybe you also possess a little Shine, or Sight, yourself. Well, that's it for this Stephen King lore video. I hope you enjoyed watching this small iceberg as much as I enjoyed creating it. Much love, we'll see you next time.